Welcome to the Werewolf Lectures. The Werewolf Lectures is a series exploring the history, cosmology, and cultural impact of the werewolf motif in myth and popular culture. The Werewolf Lectures began shortly after I created a documentary called Hunting the Hound of Cold Hollow, based on research into a werewolf legend I had discovered while working as a freelance writer in northern Vermont. I was surprised by how quickly that short film gained popularity on the web and was inundated with questions and comments from viewers. So to address these topics, and many more, I began the Werewolf Lectures in 2019, hoping to take a deeper look at the history and scholarship behind the ongoing conversations around various shapeshifters, dogmen, and other cryptozoological phenomena. So if you're ready for a deep dive into these topics, settle in and subscribe as I continue to examine all things werewolf, from ancient mythology to contemporary popular culture, as well as several of the most compelling werewolf sightings to occur here in the United States. The werewolf is perhaps one of the most iconic and best-known creatures to emerge from the universal monster pantheon, but its origins date back much further into ancient European history. One of the earliest recorded accounts of werewolfism, or to be more precise, lycanthropy, was written down by a Roman aesthete and consul to the debauched Roman Emperor Nero during the 1st century of the Common Era. But before delving into the history of werewolfism and lycanthropy, it's important first to clarify the concepts that inform our use of these terms. Strictly speaking, lycanthropy is a form of therianthropy, both of which are Greek terms referencing the ability of humans to transform themselves into other creatures, a concept that is far from exclusive to European mythology and stretches back into antiquity, at least to the age of ancient Egypt. In Europe, lycanthropy is often traced back to the ancient Greek writers from the 5th century BCE, who wrote about a tribe of people capable of shape-shifting who once lived in an area to the northeast of Greece known as Scythia. The Scythians were originally a nomadic people who came to occupy a large swath of Eurasia, ranging from the Black Sea to Siberia, bordering on China. Shapeshifting is a trait often attributed to these people who followed a shamanic spiritual tradition. In fact, the English-speaking world inherited the term shaman from these people. Therianthropy, however, may be much older, as cave paintings found in the Pyrenees dating from the Paleolithic period in France also depict people with animal heads. The ancient Greeks drew their word for werewolfism, lycanthropy, from the writer of the 2nd century of the Common Era, Pausanias, who wrote the story of Lycaon, king of Arcadia. According to the legend, Lycaon ritually murdered a young child, then decided to test the omnipotence of the god Zeus by serving him meat carved from the child's dead body. But Zeus saw through Lycaon's test, and as a punishment for his heinous act, afflicted the king and his offspring with a condition that caused them to transform into wolves. This is perhaps one of the best-known origin stories of werewolfism, and it is from this tale's central character, King Lycaon, that we have received the word lycanthropy today. Although shapeshifting as a motif in folklore can be found all around the world, including among many Native American tribes and First Nations people, lycanthropy and werewolfism, as most of us know it today, has a distinctly European pedigree. The term werewolf itself comes from Old English. It is a compound word of were, which means man, and wolf, originally spelled W-U-L-F. The Old English term werewolf is just one of many names used by Germanic-speaking peoples to describe the phenomenon of lycanthropy as they saw it. Throughout Scandinavia, a variety of terms were used to describe those who transformed themselves into wolves by various means. I'm currently preparing a special lecture on the Nordic strain of werewolfism based on my 2018-2019 investigations into its history in Iceland and Scandinavia. I hope to publish that work soon, along with a special interview with one of the world's foremost scholars of werewolfism in the Nordic tradition, so be on the lookout for that. Here I won't delve deeply into the Scandinavian werewolf, except to say that the werewolf motif was prominent throughout the pagan world of the Germanic tribes for many centuries, and was retained and possibly spread to other parts of Europe through the Norse diaspora, the Vikings, including into parts of England, Scotland, and later appearing in France and other parts of Western Europe. One of the most intriguing and most ancient werewolf myths emerged from pre-Christian Ireland, which was later recorded in the legends of the famed bishop St. Patrick, who is said to have encountered not only a single werewolf, but an entire tribe of werewolves during his missionary work in Ireland. Another lesser-known Irish werewolf legend comes to us through the saint known as Natalis, who supposedly placed a curse on a prominent Irish family who, like the descendants of Greek king Lycaon, were doomed to transform into wolves every 7 years. One important distinction to be made when examining these, the earliest tales of werewolfism in Northern Europe, is that the werewolf there was not explicitly associated with evil. The absence of evil or malice among these ancient northern werewolves might be attributed at least in part to the fact that the pre-Christian world, especially that of the Nordics, did not adhere to the same notions of sin and evil as the Christian annalists who only later injected these legends with a distinctly Christian theme. It was this more ancient, shamanistic attitude toward werewolves that prevailed prior to the Middle Ages. Even after the arrival of Christianity in Ireland and elsewhere in Northern Europe, the werewolf motif was rarely presented as something distinctly evil. It was not until much later, in medieval France, at a time when the French became enamored with all things Celtic, that the werewolf as an archetype morphed again, and the werewolf evolved into a sort of tragic figure who, borrowing from the Irish tradition, is presented as the victim of a curse. Often, French werewolf myths also add what some scholars have deemed to be a misogynistic component to the legend that was absent in the earlier legends, a component that attributes responsibility for werewolf curses to unfaithful or cunning women. Later, especially in the Germanic world as well as parts of Eastern Europe, the sympathetic view of the werewolf persists, albeit with a distinctly Christian ethos. The most notable of this variant is the strange case of an 80-year-old man from Jurgensburg, Livonia, which is in modern-day Latvia, and who was accused of being a werewolf himself. The man was arrested, tried, and lashed for heresy after he claimed that he and other werewolves, specifically those in the Germanic world and Russia, were not agents of the devil, but were in fact allies of God who did battle with the forces of darkness on earth and were welcome into heaven after their death. Many of these more nuanced historical views of the werewolf have since been overshadowed in sensationalized retellings of Germanic folk tales from the 19th century. Some authors, such as Clemens Hausmann, a prominent English activist for women's suffrage, took creative liberties with the werewolf theme in her book, The Werewolf. In her 1896 book, Hausmann presents an uncharacteristically female werewolf in a highly allegorical and quite erotic novel. As a quick side note, I've only recently obtained a copy of this book, and I find Hausmann's treatment of the werewolf to be fascinating in itself, and I intend to delve more deeply into Hausmann and her book in a future presentation. In 1897, the year after the release of Hausmann's book, Bram Stoker famously pulled the werewolf motif back toward its medieval ethos by presenting the arch-villain Dracula as a demonic creature imbued with the power of transforming himself into a wolf. Since Stoker, much of what was subsequently attributed to the werewolf, such as the creature's connection with the full moon or vulnerability to silver bullets, etc., is pure invention, with little to no basis in the ancient motifs and traits that had previously been attributed to the creature. Today, the werewolf is once again undergoing a transmutation among a group of modern cryptozoologists and self-proclaimed monster hunters who prefer to identify what many might otherwise call a werewolf under the term dogman. This phenomenon is of particular interest as more and more people emerge with claims of seeing creatures matching the traditional description of a werewolf in both North America and throughout the world. This cultural phenomenon is of particular interest to me, and I look forward to exploring its origins and evolution more deeply. Going forward, this series will examine some of the most significant of these contemporary cases while exploring the philosophical and religious concepts informing our ideas about these monsters. I will also discuss the psychology and cultural significance of the werewolf in the context of myth and history, in the hope of being able to provide a deeper and richer understanding of both the creature and the cultures and subcultures that keep it alive. I hope you will all join me for the next installment.